I'm the co-founder of Zuno, a platform that helps organizations turn complex compliance training into HIPAA, into engaging mobile-first learning experiences that not only tick the compliance box, but truly build a culture of awareness and accountability. Now, we all know that HIPAA compliance training is a top priority for organizations handling important data today. Yet, even with all the frameworks, certifications, and audits in place, breaches and violations still happen. So the real question is why? Today, we'll explore whether these failures stem from people, processes, or systems, and most importantly, what can we do better? I'm especially excited to be joined by our guest, Mr. Ross Rio, a true pioneer in this field. Ross brings over more than 35 years of experience in informational systems and cybersecurity, with a truly impressive career working for IBM, St. Luke's Episcopal Hospital, even more than 22 years with NASA, and many others. One of the most impressive achievements of his was development of the world's largest private cloud-based telemedicine network in Texas, spanning more than 116 locations and managing more than 350,000 patient records. After earning his CISSP certification in 1997, Ross went to join as a chairman of the Curriculum Development Committee, where he led the team that created the original CISSP curriculum, the same foundation still used worldwide today. So, as you have heard, there is no one better to be learning from and talking to. So, Ross, thank you so much for being here, and maybe if you can turn on your camera, that would be perfect. And we can see the perfect background to everything that I was saying in introduction. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
It's been a real pleasure, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for joining. We have a great discussion moving forward. And I think the first thing I want to ask you is, considering it's always interesting to hear how people end up here, especially considering your very impressive resume and everything you did really to shape the industry. So how did compliance and cybersecurity happen for you?
Well, if I'm honest, I'm going to say that sometimes the universe knows better what we should be doing than we know. It started when IBM found out that I knew information security and they wanted to bring me on as an access control administrator at NASA. And it's kind of mushroomed from there. Um, it seemed that it was a very, very interesting field. It was very immature at the time, but having been in it so long and having worked with some really very smart people, um, I really had an interest in doing it because I don't want to sound sentimental about it, but as a kid, I wanted to fight evil. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do that. But it turns out that having a career in this, it's kind of turned out that I get to do that. And I find it very interesting, intellectually stimulating, and very fulfilling at the same time. So it's been a very interesting journey with a lot of variation, but I feel like I've really accomplished what I intended to when I was younger.
Yeah. And ultimately have created amazing things that benefits everyone else really in this industry. So it was a great turn of events for sure. Um,
That's how I feel about it. All right.
yeah. I also saw that recently, and if you're not following Ross on LinkedIn by now, please do so because there is so much inside. Two days ago, you shared an article about the cyber attack affecting Massachusetts Hospital, and it really caught my attention because when we talk about HIPAA breaches and in general cyber attacks, I feel like to most people it comes down to fines and what does it really mean for organization. But there is a consequences go beyond that, and I
Yeah.
wanted to have your take on this.
Well, I absolutely agree with you that for the administration staff, the boards, all that, certainly the fines and the impact to the organization as an organization, certainly that needs to be a high priority. But I think the way that the Massachusetts General breach event took place and the fact that it targeted their infrastructure, I think that it is something that is kind of forgotten when you're talking about bottom line and fines and all that kind of thing, that ultimately it's the patients that suffer when we become more and more dependent upon the systems that handle information, that are dealing with medical devices and all the different technologies that are coming into healthcare generally. They're becoming more and more connected. And when they attack the infrastructure, the impact to patients is a very direct one. And in this particular case, a very unfortunate one because services were denied, various types of diagnostic things, treatment, all that sort of thing gets impacted. It results in delays, it results in services not being delivered, and that is all a direct impact on the patient. It is extremely expensive when these things happen, no doubt. But when it really impacts the human end of it, that's when it really seems to hit home as to just how dangerous these attacks can be and how pervasive. We always think they want to steal the information, but sometimes they just want to show that they can do this and damage you that way. The ultimate effect to me is that when patients can't rely, and this is to say no fault on the part of Massachusetts General, I don't want to say anything about that, but when patients feel like they can't rely on the systems and the personnel and the institutions that they truly depend so greatly on, they begin to wonder how stable, how protected the whole system is. It shakes their confidence. And I know that Mass General regards that as an extremely important thing. And I know that they're going to work hard to try to overcome that. But it's really something that we all have to look out for because eventually we're all going to be a patient at some point.
Yeah, and being a patient, as we know, is such a vulnerable state
It
as it
is.
is,
It
uh,
absolutely is.
which makes this so important. Which kind of brings me to dive right into the session and the topic today. Why do these compliance failures and breaches still happen?
Well, I think part of the reason why it happens is, well, there are multiple reasons. For one thing, healthcare is not in the business of IT or IT security. They're in the business of treating patients. And anytime you look at a business of any kind, you have to look at what they do as a business. And certainly that's no less the truth about healthcare. But they're becoming more and more dependent upon electronic systems. And that means almost automatically that they're going to be dependent upon the internet, which is the way everybody connects now. When you do a business like healthcare that is so personal, because all healthcare is personal, somebody is going to do something for a patient, but they are necessarily dependent upon the information systems they have. I think what it's pointing out is this is a part that is absolutely essential to their business as a business, but it also highlights the fact of how vulnerable it can be. One of the things that security has a problem with, privacy is the same, it is a cost to the bottom line. Compliance is a fact of life in healthcare, and security and privacy have become very much an integral part of that mandate to protect patients and their information. So when they look at it, they never think that it's not important, but they have to balance so many things. And sometimes privacy and security. And again, they do think about fines for being found not in compliance. So they're thinking about that aspect too. But I think it's becoming more and more important that these are things that we have to do simply to stay in business, simply to keep doing what we're doing. And healthcare has to struggle because it has to balance so many things that are fighting for the money that they have. And in today's environment, that fight is becoming even more important because the funding that goes for healthcare is being curtailed in some ways. Being a cost to the bottom line, it's always in jeopardy of having attention drawn away from it because of the cost it associates. It's not free, but it is a mandate. What it results in, though, is it results in healthcare being seen by the hacker community worldwide as a soft target. They do all the right things as best they can, they monitor things as best they can, but they can't do things, as I would say, in a military grade way, to borrow that phrase. but they have to do something. And they are trying very hard to do the best they can, but they're still a soft target. And unfortunately, that is the reputation, and it's proven almost all the time that
Yeah.
that's the case.
One of the things that we see when we talk with clients is some of them can sometimes tell us, we're too small. Who will want to maybe target us? Or we're sure everything will be fine. Is the size, first of all, something that should be considered and that impacts the way you should think about compliance?
I can say what the regulations will tell you, and that size does not matter. From a professional standpoint, I can tell you that absolutely size does not matter. One of the reasons why they think that is because the mental frame is always that they are the target. Well, there are two different ways to look at a target. They could be the target. Hackers want to steal the information from them, thinking that because they're small, they will be a very soft target, and all too often that proves to be the case. But the other way that they can be a target is as a stepping stone to those that they're connected with. And that could mean that their suppliers, as we say under HIPAA, their business associates, or any contractors that they do work with that they're connected to, you could attack them, get to the next level up, the small healthcare organization. But from them, who else might they reach?
Mm.
It could be that a doctor's office connected to a large urban hospital is who gets attacked first. And by getting the doctor's office compromised, they can go to that large urban hospital. And then the world is their oyster, so to speak. They can go anywhere from there because hackers will try to get from one place to another, like these are stepping stones. So they have to recognize that they're a conduit to somebody else, not just a target in their own right.
So you're basically a part of the ecosystem that gets threatened if even one of the smallest pieces is left exposed.
That's right. And like I say, the regulations make no reference to size.
Hmm.
Size means a more target rich environment, but size might also mean easier ways to get to that target rich environment. And so they have to alter their thinking a bit. They're thinking that they're defending whoever they're connected with, given that they're connected to them through electronic means. So, as the ecosystem, as you say, we're all a part of that, and all of those entities are a part of that. And to get one leads to others.
And one of the things that, what are maybe the most common attitudes you have also seen working with clients? Because the other part of that is maybe thinking it won't happen to us because of
Oh,
the psychological things like temporal discounting or my background is behavioral economics. So we kind of discussed and researched how people place more value on present and underestimate future consequences. So
mhm.
what have you seen that actually makes people move if that is not maybe a breach that happened? Because then of course the fire is on, they have to.
Yes.
But what else have you seen that makes people change that attitude and have that mindset shift towards this is something that we should pay attention to, even though we know that there are so many things fighting for our resources and our time and our money?
Well, one of the ways that I look at this problem is, well, I have friends that have been to Las Vegas. Probably some of our listeners have been there too. And there's a particular dice game known as craps. And when you roll the dice, either you win or you don't. And the way that I've experienced people in several in the industries that I've been in, they tell themselves that, we're too small, this won't happen to us, or we're already in a good spot, we've got a strong defense. Rolling the dice like that is a recipe for disaster because when you do that, you're ignoring the realities. It really has become, and this is a very trite phrase, it is still true though, that it is a matter of when, not if.
Mm.
The problem with that has another dimension. because you're expected to know the regulations that apply to your industry, and HIPAA's been around, it celebrates its 30th birthday next year. So it's been around a while. Everybody's expected to know that it exists. Everybody is expected to know that it's mandated and you will go with it. And yet, I still experience entities that are rolling the dice and thinking that it won't happen to them, that the enforcement body will not show up. And as soon as they think that, they get a knock on the door or a letter in the mail saying, oh, by the way, we're going to drop by and see you and see how you're doing. I've actually seen that happen more than once. The problem that that brings out, though, is that now that it's 30 years old or nearly, and you're expected to know, if you're not doing the things that it asks you to do, the fines have multiplied very significantly because you're not doing things you know you're supposed to be doing. And saying that, well, these are expensive things and we're trying to do everything we can, but we can't quite get there yet, or they're not doing anything. It's one of those things where those excuses fall on deaf ears, because a law like HIPAA gives you enough flexibility that there are multiple ways to get to the solution. And yet people throw up their hands and say, it's too costly, we don't have the staff. And these are all ancient excuses and not really even valid anymore, because we do. The technologies are there, the expertise is there, and they're simply going to have to recognize that rolling the dice is a recipe for failure and a very costly one. Fines are starting now at around $2 million. And as expensive as that may sound, that could be disastrous and even a level of bankruptcy for small practices, because the smaller and medium-sized ones are the ones that are getting hit the hardest. That's what I've seen, at least. So they still have to balance everything, and I appreciate that they do, but they simply can't ignore it. It's too expensive. And what I tell them is, if you think it's expensive to do this, think how expensive it's going to be when you get caught out when that event happens to you, which it almost certainly will. It's always cheaper to do it and avoid that than it is to suffer the event and have to do it again anyway. That's like paying for it at least twice.
Yeah. And do you think it is driven in at least any way by patients themselves, by the people whose information it is? Because I feel like with the age where we hear about these breaches more and we hear how many people were impacted, is there a shift in the patient body in how they maybe choose their providers and how they choose who to put their trust with?
I think your question about the trust that they have in their providers is becoming much more a reality every day. The news always produces the stories of these things. The OCR, they're the enforcement body for HIPAA. OCR publishes all the cases and settlements on their own website. If anybody's interested, they can go there and find out. It tells who did what or who failed to do what the settlement was, and how much it cost. I think that patients are taking a greater self-interest. I don't think we've reached the point where patients consider this as the make or break point for them to decide if they go with one provider or another. But I think that you can count on the fact that if they perceive that, well, I'll just pick Bedrock General Hospital as a mythical example. If they find that the protection of that patient's information has turned the hospital into a cybersecurity Swiss cheese, so to speak, they're going to think twice. They're going to say, well, how do I know that you're going to protect everything? Because they know from their own experience, the patients, that if you impact them directly or you impact their information in an adverse way, you're impacting both the information and the patient. It is becoming a normal thing that the institution's reputation is being damaged by these events. And because they are becoming front page news on a fairly routine basis these days, patients are better informed. So it may not be the linchpin about their decision, but I've got the impression that it's becoming much more of a central issue when they get down to actually choosing their provider, part of their decision, and it affects what they do choose.
Yeah.
So yes, I think that is becoming part of that decision-making process in a very real way.
And what about good examples? What does a good compliance system look like?
I think that compliance is a fundamental part of what any organization that suffers as much regulation as healthcare does. It has to be made an integral part of how they handle their administrative processes. There's no escaping it. So, how can we make that process more efficient? Because that's one of the biggest complaints. It's paperwork. American healthcare is known for having one of the highest administrative cost levels of any administrative type system on the planet like this, almost twice as much as some. And yet, they still struggle with the administrative inefficiencies. If we can integrate what we do to meet compliance and cybersecurity and protect privacy and integrate that smoothly with everything else, I have my own experience to tell me that they can peacefully coexist because I've made it happen myself. That, I think, is a way to not bury or obscure the cost, but it reduces it because now it's just a fundamental part of what you do rather than, say, a third layer of frosting on a cake. Totally unnecessary. We can do without it, but of course we can't. So, how can we make the whole thing more efficient? How many different ways can we eliminate, do it one way, the right way, and have that answer several different questions, like at federal and state levels, for example? You satisfy one, you satisfy both, instead of doing it twice.
Mm.
So we have to find more efficient ways of doing this and integrating them and raise the cultural level among the people.
So I hear you talk about, we talked about a lot how it's always a concern how it affects the bottom line and how it is, and it actually is a cost. But
Mhm.
I'm also hearing you say how it can be more effective, which means costs are being reduced. It can achieve alignment of processes if it's integrated with the business goals. So there is also a little bit of competitive advantage there because it also has then positive impact on the reputation of the company.
Agreed.
So do you in any way maybe track a return on investment into having a good compliance system? Is there an example or how you approach it with your clients?
When it comes to the return on investment, this is not a typical kind of ROI type of calculation because we're really talking about cost reduction or amplification of the uses of one thing so that instead of doing it 6 times, we do it once. But there definitely is a way of doing that. Instead of calculating the cost of 6 extra steps, if we simply integrate, and this is something like most processes where you have to start and do it and find the more efficient ways. So there is a maturity cycle that you have to go through. But in my experience, the more we do that, we first have to get up the courage to get started with it in the first place. We have to look for the inefficiencies and try to identify why we should stop doing that extra step that we don't need to if we're doing it this other way. There is a way to calculate cost reduction by eliminating steps that really aren't necessary. Because well, as Ben Franklin is supposed to have said, a penny saved is a penny earned. If we don't spend the penny on the extra step, we save it and we can focus it somewhere else. I've seen that with the adoption of the electronic transactions that HIPAA required, that was one of the first things that it required back in 2002. That reduced the payment cycle, which was totally paper before that, by a very significant margin. I've had clients that went from a 45 to 60-day payment cycle down to 30 days and sometimes less. So the return on investment with that shows just what can happen when you start doing things more efficiently. I think using that as a guide, we should be doing the same thing in all the administrative processes and try to find the ways to make them more efficient by eliminating unnecessary duplicating steps. And that way they can show real cost savings. And if you save money, well, you've saved money
Yeah.
and you've not spent it in a pointless way. So that's kind of how I see that. There's probably other ways, better ways, evolving ways to do that, but that's what I see right now.
No, but that's significant, especially because what also I'm hearing you say is that it's not about these big changes that will be perceived as something burdensome, but as adjustments, efficient moves that then people will be also happy to implement because ultimately it's better for the whole process. It almost reduces the level of administration that they're doing if it's done right.
That's correct. It will require some re-engineering of processes, but I think overall it will reduce an administrative workload and make it more efficient. And I think people will be happier with that kind of a reduction because now they'll feel like they're more efficient. Everything gets done faster, everything gets done better. And I think that's the ultimate outcome of taking on a process like this. But it requires commitment.
Yeah. Just as a reminder to everyone, you can always write us questions and ask us anything that you're interested in. And one such question came around. We talked lightly about people and the culture we create, but one of the questions we had was, what are your thoughts on insider threats, the ones who are handling the patient health information data?
Insider threat is a particularly thorny problem. The information is very personal. Some people are tempted if they find out that a friend or a relative or even someone they don't like very much gets admitted to a hospital or is a patient in the doctor's office. They may just get really curious and want to find out what's going on, whatever their reason. If their reason is they just want to, be sympathetic to somebody, that doesn't make it any the less a violation. But if they want to cause harm to somebody, I can't think of a better, more heinous way of doing it than finding out medical details about them and taking advantage of them. I consulted in one legal case where that was what was done, and the person ended up a seriously injured party, and somebody went to jail for the whole thing. If we take the example of Congresswoman Giffords several years ago suffering an assassination attempt in Tucson, 13 people got nosy. And it was published that 13 people got fired because the Tucson Medical Center discovered that they were doing exactly that. Whatever their intentions, they represent just how prevalent and how real an insider threat problem can be. The problem we face is these people that work in these institutions are going to have access to this very sensitive information. We have to go through credentialing and we have to go through background checks, but we don't want to have them work in an unhealthy, almost a siege mentality, thinking that Big Brother is always watching them. So we have to do various things in the hopes of encouraging a positive mental attitude, good work ethics, and that sort of stuff, which can be very hard to impart to people without them feeling like you're imposing on them, trying to rework their thinking, so to speak. Because a lot of people have very good ethics, but they don't like being told that they have to have changes made in their ethics to keep them from doing that. It's something that we as professionals struggle with all the time, and it's more difficult to discover than an outside attack because trusted insiders are already inside. They are already having access to this information, and it's not always easy to detect that they have done something they shouldn't have. Because if they're looking at paper, well, paper doesn't have an audit trail like a computer does. So giving them reminders, proper management, oversight without being oppressive, it's a delicate balance sometimes, but it is a very serious threat pretty much all the time. And cases have been found that people got directly harmed by insider threats, but it's always going to be a work in progress. I've never worked in an environment where there was not an insider threat when sensitive information was present.
Mm.
And we just have to keep working on it and building a positive mental attitude with our workforce in the various ways we can.
So how do you, because sometimes accidents happen not because of the intention, but because of the lack of attention
Mm-hmm.
or maybe lack of understanding how a certain regulation relates to them, because we all know how training is being done and maybe how it's being perceived. So how do you switch from that tick the box attitude towards the culture? How do you make sure that people actually know why is this important and what actually applies to them?
Well, in my practice, what I've done is I make sure that when somebody says, "Well, what's that regulation for?" or questions like that, I always try to give them an understanding of what the regulation really means, what we are supposed to be doing. For example, when I talk to somebody about negligence, I remind them that negligence is about two things: doing something that is wrong or failing to do something that is right.
Mm.
And the way HIPAA looks at this is if you do that, either of those two actions, knowing that you're failing to do the right thing or not doing the wrong thing, the fines magnify almost by a factor of 10. It's the knowing that you're doing it wrong that makes it so bad. So by helping them understand why we do these things, rather than just, oh, it's just some regulation and I just have to do it, I just have to check a box. I try to give them enough information about it that they see that by them doing the right thing, they become invested, even a little bit, in
Mm.
making sure that it's done the right way, or that something that's wrong is not done at all. That I think helps. Engaging with them to increase their understanding. Everybody's going to hate compliance at some point because it's a pain in the neck. I mean, let's just be honest.
Mm.
But if we understand why and we understand what the impact could be and how real that might turn out to be in their own environment, I think we engage them and give them a sense of, well, I really ought to do that way
Yeah.
because it might be me as a patient. Sometimes I have to play that card, but it tends to get through to them.
Yeah, that's very important. That moment of making sure that at least compliance training and knowing is there and delivering in a way that is at least a little bit more interesting and relevant and applicable to them was actually what started our whole thinking and where Zuno came from. But if with that said, everything is moving quite fast, technology is changing. We have, digital practices, digital processes increasingly. Regulation is adjusting and changing with that. So how can companies create almost a feedback loop that makes sure that they continuously evaluate the effectiveness of the programs, of the training and awareness and the culture there is in organizations to make sure that they really keep up with everything that is evolving?
Well, in my own experience, I think one of the things that I have to pass on to them is don't feel like you have to adopt everything the instant it comes out.
Mm.
I think there is a certain amount of pressure that executives in healthcare, especially people like uh, technology officers, chief information officers, chief information security officers, I think there's a certain amount of pressure that we feel to be an early adopter, be a quick adopter. And I think we need to get over that. Technology is always a wonderful thing when it works, as we like to say. But technology is often hyped to the point that we adopt it before we really have a chance to assess our own environment to see where a given technology is going to fit. As you and I have spoken, what is the problem that I have to solve?
Mm.
Or what is the situation that a technology of some kind is going to seriously, materially improve? Adopting technology without a clear idea of what you're going to do with it is a recipe for failure because then you're going to be stuck with something that you're going to be searching for something to make it do. And that's money wasted. It is true that technology is advancing, the medical technology all the time. One thing that affects technology adoption in healthcare that doesn't really seem to be present in other industries is that if it is something used for diagnosis or treatment, that is a technology they want to explore because, quite frankly, it's billable.
Mm-hmm.
The technology we're talking about for security and privacy is not. It's part of administrative overhead. That's just a fact of the hospital business. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't look at those things to see if we can improve what we're doing, even a little. But we should always remember that we have to have a problem that we're trying to solve and then go looking for something to do that, because every dollar in healthcare is extraordinarily precious and, quite frankly, difficult for them to come by. We do have to think in terms of what is going to be the return to us, whether it's greater efficiency or something buildable that patients need. We should always be thinking along that line somewhere in the back of our heads, maybe. The other thing is, if you can improve what you're doing, that can reduce your cost as well. It can make your defenses more robust, your compliance posture better. If you think about that in a strategic way, I think that can also lead you to make better quality decisions about what you do adopt as well as what you don't. Because not everything that's out there is something you need. If you have a problem, by all means, go find a solution. But don't make one up just because you want to adopt a particular thing.
It really ties into the little discussion we had before this live about the AI and where kind of compliance is going and how people are approaching this new technology now, which comes back to, as you said, if you have a problem that you know, or at least think this can help, that's great. But going for the technology for the sake of technology can create other issues that you may not have expected, maybe.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to AI, I think that I think that the potential is very definitely real, and I think that it can be realized. But like any other technology, it's going to be suitable in certain contexts and not suitable in others. For one thing, I don't think it's going to wholesale replace people. I think we're far too early in the cycle of AI. There's a lot of exciting things out there, robots and this kind of stuff. It's all very exciting. But that excitement can obscure what business value it can actually contribute. I think AI has a lot to offer. But, well, frankly, I think that an organization that wants to or believes it should be thinking about I think they should be. But
Mm.
what I think they should be doing is looking at it for what state it's in now, what kind of AI, because there are actually several types, and all we really hear about is ChatGPT and the others that are helping people write papers and whatnot. There's a lot more AI out there, but it's all very much in its infancy. Take a look at it from a strategic standpoint. See if you can think of where it might fit and follow it for a while. See how it evolves. Because if anything, that technology does, other than disappoint us by having been hyped so badly, I think AI is suffering somewhat from that, possibly a lot. Others on this webinar may think, it's just, pie in the sky and maybe it's going to be good, maybe it's not. But if we're looking at it from a strategic standpoint, I think that's the wise approach at this stage because it can be costly to adopt. We already know that if you have ChatGPT writing a paper for you, you're going to have to go through and proofread it yourself because it's going to make mistakes. That's been proven over and over and over again. And you don't want to have an AI driven proofreader to do that for you either, because that just magnifies the problem. But use it for what it can do, keep an eye on how it evolves, and see what it can contribute in the way of value. Perhaps a compliance platform that makes use of it might be one of the things that you can look at first as a way of possibly streamlining things. Now, that's purely a suggestion. I would not go out and adopt any of these things without thoroughly looking at them. Like I say, those things, because they promise administrative efficiency, maybe, but there's a hump at the beginning. you're going to have to buy it. And
Mhm.
that's probably going to be very expensive. And it's going to take you a while, possibly years, to realize what the return on investment actually is, if there is one. So I like the idea of taking a strategic view and watching it to see where it's going and start envisioning how it might help you so that when the time comes where you actually crystallize a problem that you want it to solve, then you'll know what you're looking for and know what you're trying to solve with it. So I think right now, strategic vision and caution is probably the better approach instead of just jumping off that cliff.
Mm. Go with an actual problem that you can maybe try out before you fully commit and make sure
I
that it.
I think that you make a very, very good point with that. Try something out on a small scale just to see.
Yeah,
Validate what you think before you jump off that cliff. Yes.
absolutely. We have two other questions. One is there at least, is there showing a mentality in the industry similar to some others that these possible fines are perceived as a cost of doing business?
Well, security and privacy is definitely a cost to the bottom line. And because it's mandated by requirements and regulations, I think we have to treat it as a cost of doing business. But I also think that we need to find a way to do it in an efficient way so that if the government says we have to do this, we don't choose the most expensive solution for it because there's going to be several in
Mhm.
many instances. I think that the way that we attack something like that is yes, it's part of our business. It is part of the core business in healthcare to protect privacy and security because of the value of the information. And we have to treat it that way, but always try to treat it from the most efficient way you can. Because HIPAA actually, and this is something that I think is overlooked a lot, HIPAA gives you a good amount of freedom in the way that you can pick solutions. It's not a one size fits all. Yes, we have to achieve these various goals, but there's usually multiple pathways to get to that destination. And those are the things that we should be exploring to keep that cost of doing business down to a reasonable, possibly low level.
And the last question we have from outside, is there any chance continuous facial monitoring or facial biometrics will help existing MFA layers for secure login?
Um, I'm sorry, say it again.
Um, is there any chance continuous facial monitoring or facial biometrics will help existing layers for secure login?
Actually, I think that that is still something that's a bit of an evolving technology. I think the answer is basically yes.
Mhm.
Um, I have I have cybersecurity associates that work in Las Vegas. Now, this is going to sound like it's unrelated, but the people in Las Vegas that use that kind of scanning, looking for known cheaters to enter their casinos, they really are at the front edge of this particular technology. And law enforcement and even government law enforcement talk with them and how they use it all the time. And it's gone through an awful lot of refinement. I think that it does hold a great deal of promise, assuming that we implement it in the right way. But yes, I think that there's great promise in that. It just has to perhaps be tested. It isn't cheap technology, that's for sure. And we also, as always, we have to look out for what its limitations actually are.
Mm.
Because every control we put in place from a security perspective has limitations. And we don't always recognize what those might be. So, to your point from an earlier question, try something small. Try it out, see how it works, and really look at it objectively. But overall, I'm very optimistic that it's got a lot to offer.
Mm. So, thank you so much for sharing all the insights and examples and your own personal experiences that you have lived through with all of this. Before we close, do you have one last key piece of advice for the audience listening in how to approach compliance?
I think if I was going to leave people with a thought about compliance is, well, I'll just be honest. It's the kind of thing that we all hate. We want to complain about it because it complicates our lives and the delivery of our services. But it is part of the business that we're in. It plays an extraordinarily important role in the overall protection of our patient. And here's kind of the thought that crystallizes it for me. Our patients are now twofold. We have humans and we have their electronic version, which we see in their information in their record. So we have the H human and we have the E human. We have to treat them holistically. We have to treat them as a single entity because if we affect one in an adverse or a positive way, we're going to affect the other. And I think we always have to remember that ultimately they're the ones who are going to pay the price for us doing our jobs the proper way, the efficient way. I want to emphasize that term again. But we're all going to be a patient at some point. Being a cybersecurity person, if I go to a hospital, I'm going to want to know that they're taking care of things. But the average person isn't going to ask that question. And I frankly don't want them to have to, because I want us doing our job so that they don't have to worry.
So thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us today. I encourage you to follow Ross and his work if you haven't already. If you're interested in learning more about how Zuno helps organizations make their compliance training more effective, visit zunogames.com or reach out to me directly. We're always happy to connect. Also on November 20th, we're being joined by Matt Kelly, editor and CEO at Radical Compliance, where we'll be discussing the topic of AI in compliance and definitely going from what we spoke about today with Ross. So thank you so much and hope you join us next time as well. Have a great day.